Mostly like thank you, Dieter and Amin, for hosting this event. And a little bit background on Zooglar community. We started in 2015, helping other Zooglers, people who leave Google in their next endeavors. A lot of them included people who are starting their startups or people who want to join some of the early stage startups. I would recommend everyone please mute your microphone unless you are speaking so that there is less disturbance. In terms of the community itself, we are 12,000 members worldwide. We typically help in like many different ways. For instance, if you're applying to YC, Y Combinator, we help with application review as well as we provide recommendations. We also very regularly host demo days where we have partnered with Stonks to host these demo days. In the last one, we had like over 600 RSVP investors who attended the demo day. And obviously, given that we have a lot of people here who are enthusiastic about blockchain, we have like blockchain specific groups. We have a Slack channel on blockchain. We also have a mailing list. If you have interest, you can please drop me an email and I can add you to that mailing list as well. We host like several blockchain specific events, as well as if you're interested in kind of like learning about companies who are hiring in crypto space, you can also drop me a note. You can also just email zoog@zooglar.co. That's XOOG@zooglar.co. And that'll also come to me. So I'm happy to respond on that. If you have any questions from today as well, or if you have any feedback, do let us know. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Amin to quickly do a bit of introduction of yourself and obviously introduce Dieter. And I'm really excited to learn about Dapper Labs from Dieter here.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ankit. First of all, I want to thank you, Chris and Kush, for building this community and like everybody that's involved in like organizing and doing all these great events. Honestly, it's such an amazing community, and like, you know, you're always like here to help and stuff. So I really appreciate it. And thank you for all the folks that are attending with us today. And Dieter, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. So my name is Amin. I'm a Zoogler. I've been a Zoogler from 2013 to 2019. Left Google to do like e-commerce and some other stuff, and then now I'm building something in fintech, and so a lot of blockchain potentially to be built there, like a lot of projects on blockchain. And so I got a pleasure to know Roham, the CEO of Dapper Labs, and Mick, the COO, in person. And I reached out, and then they said, like, you know, if you're talking to the Zooglar community, you have a lot of engineers there. Dieter should be the guy for you to talk to and to get like to pick his brain on a lot of things going on in the Web3 and like blockchain, especially that Dieter, you are the CTO of Dapper Labs and also the chief architect of Flow, which is actually another like a chain like for blockchain projects. So so you have been like, you worked at Apple, Microsoft, and you have more than 20 years of experience in technology. So we're really looking forward to learning from you like all these things and like what's going on and what's new in the industry. So do you want to like start by giving us like a background about yourself and take it from there?
Yeah, I'm happy to start that. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Very happy to be here. I think it's such a cool group. I'd never heard of Zooglers before, but I love the idea. So I'm glad that y'all were able to show up and listen to us talk and hopefully engage with us in conversation on this topic. So I've been in tech forever. When I was 8 years old, I told my parents I wanted to be a computer research scientist. Then when I was like 25, I realized that computer research scientist isn't a thing. There's like, computer researcher, like computer science researchers, which is very abstract. And then there's, engineers. And I always fell into the camp of building things that are very practical bent. I always was big into human-computer interaction. I always felt like it was the job of the computer to meet what the user needed rather than the user trying to figure out what the computer needed, which was a somewhat heretical view in the 90s when I got started professionally. And so I was a big fan of Apple platforms and Mac computers when that was not cool. And of course, when we switched from IT departments buying computers to end users buying their own computers, suddenly that that flipped a little. So I'm sure there are plenty of people here who like non-Apple platforms, but you can't argue that they're irrelevant the way that you could in 1997. I joined Axiom Zen in 2013. I had just come from a company here in Vancouver that was building mobile applications. And I was really excited to join Axiom Zen, which was started by Roham Garagozlu and his brother Sam, because they were like the meta startup. Like they were, the idea is that, you know, most startups fail, and it's not because the ideas are bad, but because building a startup is hard. So why should we just try and be one startup? Let's build multiple different product ideas over time, and just sort of like, you know, take multiple swings until hopefully something hits. And so, you know, I worked on probably a dozen different projects in my time at Axiom Zen. And during that time, there were probably more than 30 different projects that were worked on. But of course, in 2017, when everyone started talking about Ethereum, we started looking at what we could do with blockchain technology. You know, the thesis of Axiom Zen is that whenever new technology comes along, new products become possible. And so what are the products that create value for people that are now possible with this new technology? So we looked at a bunch of different stuff. Everyone back in 2017 was talking about how blockchain was going to revolutionize all sorts of things, you know, real estate, contract negotiations, insurance. But it wasn't clear how anyone was going to actually build that stuff. And so we started looking into those various things. And in the end, we realized it's all a really heavy lift. And so we were better off starting with something simple and light and an experiment. And so we decided to build something, I don't know, as an appetizer, as an amuse-bouche, just like something that no one would give that much attention to, but it would sure teach us a lot, and it would be a fun thing for us to build. And that, of course, was CryptoKitties. And so we ended up building CryptoKitties, and we launched it by the end of 2017. It became something of a phenomenon at the end of that year, and attracted enough users to actually break Ethereum, make Ethereum essentially unusable for about a week or two, because the whole system was completely overwhelmed. So with that success, everyone was very excited about what we were doing, especially in the investment community. And so we spun out Dapper Labs. And so Dapper Labs is a separate company from Axiom Zen. And Roham and I and Max Lavelle were the co-founders of Dapper Labs. We, of course, took the CryptoKitties IP, and then we looked at, you know, what should be next. And in the end, what became next were what we felt were the three pillars necessary to create good consumer experiences in the world of blockchain. And that was a blockchain itself, wallet software, and ultimately NBA Top Shot, and then, you know, later the other sports products. So that's a pretty long introduction, but I
Cut it out. I'm
gives you a
listening to
sense of
something.
things.
Yeah.
No.
You're selfish.
Thank you, Dieter. That's really an amazing path that, you know, like especially like when you I remember like running into a Mick like in San Francisco, like when CryptoKitties was just getting started, and then now like there is no Web3 or blockchain like talk I listen to that doesn't mention CryptoKitties, because just like, you know, seriously, like there was a Harvard professor that was doing like a 10 session course about like Web3 and like blockchain, and almost every session CryptoKitties comes up. So that was definitely like a phenomenon. So fantastic. That's great success, and I'm really looking forward to seeing like other products from Dapper Labs. So why don't you tell us a little bit about like, you know, so CryptoKitties, as you mentioned, like kind of like bucked down Ethereum. Like I remember this, like a lot of people were like kind of like unhappy that Ethereum like was kind of blocked, but you know, that was, I think it was a good thing, because that showed like the limitation that Ethereum needed to like work like through or like fix, or maybe like have alternatives. And so I believe like from that like flow like was born. Do you want to tell us a little bit how that came to be?
Yeah, it wasn't obvious. I mean, what was obvious at the time was that we couldn't build a consumer-facing, consumer-oriented product company on top of Ethereum. You know, it sounds amazing to say we broke Ethereum and we had so much traffic that the Ethereum network couldn't handle it. What will probably blow you all away is that that was between 10 and 20,000 DAUs. That's all it took to push Ethereum past its limit. And so when we started the new company and we're like, you know, we had this solid focus of consumer entertainment products, the question became, well, where are we going to build that? Like, you can't build a consumer products company with only 10,000 users. And so the next step was, where do we build it then? And the answer, the first answer was not, we build our own blockchain. In fact, the product manager I worked with, Lane LaFrance, she and I worked together on Flow from the beginning, before there was a Flow. She explicitly went to Roham, the CEO, and said, "Don't worry, you know, we're going to find a blockchain. We're not going to succumb to not invented here syndrome. We don't need to build our own blockchain." And we spent researching other proposals for blockchains for 2 or 3 months. And what we realized is that, and this is like kind of a weird way of putting it, but we realized that the people building blockchains were solving the problems of building a blockchain, not solving the problems of building on a blockchain, right? So they were solving their own problem, right? My problem is my blockchain isn't fast enough. I don't have enough transactions per second. How do I make sure that there's more transactions per second? And what they weren't thinking about is the application developers using this platform, building on top of this platform, what do they care about? And so, largely speaking, you could bucket the blockchains being proposed in 2017 and 2018 and 2019 into 2 sort of buckets. One was, well, decentralization isn't that important. We don't actually need hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people participating in this network. We just need, you know, 20, 30, 40 different computers working together, and that's enough security. That's enough decentralization. And I rejected that, not because I was afraid of governments and whatnot, which is, I think, what a lot of people in the crypto world talk about, because I'm worried of companies, right? Imagine that there is a network that has 20 shares in it, or even 100 shares in it. And if you own a supermajority of shares in that network, you control billions of dollars, if not trillions of dollars of commerce. Do we actually believe that there are no companies in the world that would not come in and not break it, not undermine it, but charge rent to access it, right? Find a way to get that captured resource and pay a gatekeeper's fee every time you wanted to access that thing. And so that was not something we wanted to build our business on top of. The other approach was sharding, right? If you're an engineer, you're familiar with database sharding. You're also familiar with the idea of, you know, you also know that the banking world never jumped on the NoSQL bandwagon, right? When value is at stake, when potential malicious actors are at stake, eventual consistency is not good enough. And so when the notion of sharded blockchains came along, what we realized is that as application developers, if we were building on a sharded blockchain, we were going to have to build the synchronization primitives ourselves rather than those being built into the blockchain. And that was going to make our lives very difficult. And so when I, as the CTO of this company, said, well, what are we going to build? What technology are we going to bet this company on? I didn't see any technology out there that I was willing to do it. Fortunately, we had just talked to all of the best blockchain thinkers in the world, because they're all building these blockchains. We had our own engineering team internally, and we had all of these ideas swirling in our head. And so we asked ourselves, well, can we do better? Is there a better solution here if we come at it from the perspective of what do we need as application developers? And that's where Flow came from, was that what do we need as application developers, not how can we make a better blockchain? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I like the approach when you mentioned that you were thinking about like how, like, what's important is how to build a better application, like how to build the applications on the layer of the blockchain, because, you know, I mean, I don't know how Windows works. I don't know how the kernel is coded. So but what I care about is like how the APIs are exposed, like is it fast and all that stuff. So I think that's the approach that it seems like you folks are took. And from my understanding, maybe I'm wrong, is that maybe like Flow was one of the first blockchains that used proof of stake instead of proof of work. Is that correct?
Yeah, at the time when we were proposing and designing Flow, there was a non-trivial number of projects that were intending to use proof of stake. Okay. There was still a number of projects that were proposed that were building proof of work, but I don't think any of those actually had any success. So to me, proof of stake was like, it was a non-starter. Proof of work was a non-starter. There was no question that the only way to go forward was proof of stake. But that wasn't an especially differentiated position from the blockchains that were being built. The blockchains that already existed, of course, Bitcoin and Ethereum, were using proof of work and still are at this point.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Jeter. I appreciate it. So so now, since Flow actually is a layer that actually developers can build applications on top of it, and you know, like the value of a framework or like a platform like this is like how many applications are built on it. So what does Dapper Lab have like in programs or like support for the developers and the engineers and the builders that want to build on Flow? Like you're talking to a bunch of them. Like, you know, we have like amazing engineers here like that are thinking about building applications. So what kind of programs Dapper Labs have for that?
I mean, also looks like Kish also have a question. So why don't Dieter, you answer this and then we can take Kish's question.
Yeah, I was going to take that next.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, it's tough, right? There's a lot of things we can do, and we're trying to do them all. So we are blessed with an amazing community. So I think the best place, if anyone here is actually trying to build on Flow, is to join make sure you're in the Flow Discord. Our engineers are there, but lots of other people are there who are, you know, really excited about this project and this ecosystem, and are happy to help other teams building on it, even folks that aren't internal to Dapper Labs. And so that's a great resource. We've done our best to build a really great doc site. One of the early decisions we made was to make sure that there was a playground, a live playground that you could use within the browser to get a feel for cadence. So we developed our own programming language, again, for very similar reasons. So when we looked at when we build applications, the frustrations we had with Solidity in particular, but even just the whole programming model that is used by Solidity and most, you know, and many other blockchains, it is very complicated and it's easy to screw up. And so we wanted to make something that was easier to understand, harder to screw up, easier to read and audit and confirm was correct. And so that was, so making sure there was like that playground was there. We haven't been able to do a lot of like hackathons and events and whatnot. We've done some, and of course they've had to be virtual, but I think this year the team is getting really excited about being able to do some stuff live, which I think really helps. But I'll be honest, I think I'm a firm believer that the most important thing you can do to get people to want to build on your platform, I think the most important thing you can do is make it so that people want to build on your platform, not so people know how to build on your platform. I think that, and the way you do that is by showing what's possible. And I think something like NBA Top Shot and our other products, that is, I think, what gets people most excited about Flow, is seeing, oh, you can create a blockchain, a real blockchain, fully decentralized design underneath the hood, you know, asymmetric public key encryption, you know, protecting everything. And you can create this nice user experience that, you know, regular folks who don't want to learn a bunch of the nuts and bolts of blockchain technology and don't want to install web browser extensions, that they can actually access it and use easily. So I think that's the most important thing we did, was demonstrate what's possible. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Sure. I think so. We can open it to the folks here. Like, I think Sean, is that the first? Yeah, I think Sean. Do you want to unmute yourself, Sean, and ask your question?
I think that's from me, right?
Yeah, Kish.
Oh, Kish.
Yeah.
Okay.
So thank you so much for sharing your perspective on how things progressed. I just want to give a shout out. Like, you know, I put up a CryptoKitty background. I remember very clearly remember the first day I checked it out, and I felt it was ridiculous. That was my first reaction, to be honest, and then also enamored by it. I think for me, that was the switching point because I, was following along everything that was happening in the crypto side of things. But I think this project really pushed me from a skeptic to a believer of like, there's something here, there's engagement, there's community. And I think as far as I can remember, the community aspect, this is the first mainstream project that I came across. I think my question is going back to the story you were sharing, right? When you were looking at these blockchains and these insights that you were getting at, look, we don't need like millions of computers like trying to coordinate. We probably need 10, 20, 40, right? And all those things. So I think a clarifying question, first of all, was that in context of CryptoKitties, right? Is this like when you're trying to build CryptoKitties, is that when the problem came about? And if yes, was there a hesitation there? Because inherently CryptoKitties is a very consumer focused facing application. If I look at from that perspective, and here you are, you've hit a wall and you're building technology, which is generally like on a consumer side of things is like a no, because then you're pushed on two sides, right? Because you're innovating product and then you're innovating technology. So if that's the right context, then I think the second question makes sense.
Yeah, so the problem we needed to solve, the problem that Ethereum didn't solve for us was scale, right? Ethereum is proof of work is a problem, but even back then, Ethereum had planned to move to a proof of stake system. And so the problem that I would have been relatively happy staying on Ethereum if we felt like the scale was going to be there. And at that time, the proposal to scale the Ethereum network was exclusively through sharding. And as I said, if you're building on a sharded blockchain, as the application developer, you need to solve the synchronization problem. And if you've ever had a deadlock in software, imagine if your software is running on a blockchain that you can't reboot. So deadlocks there are very, very dead. And actually, you can lock up potentially millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in a deadlock with there. So that's a very risky notion. So that was fundamentally the issue. There was we wanted there to be scale, but we also wanted to have a programming model that was fully synchronous, where we, as for that inner loop, right? Your software, a Web3 distributed application, decentralized application, most of that is just running in the browser the way every other web application works. Even a lot of what would normally be the backend in a Web2 application can be run off-chain, but that like core central, like the master database is the blockchain, and that thing needs to have strong serialization guarantees. And so that's what we wanted to build into Flow without doing that by giving a very small number of actors, the node operators, the ability to potentially control what was happening in that network and therefore extract rent. So that was where that came from. I don't know if that answered your question or if you were trying to get at something else.
No, it does answer my question. I guess a more direct way of asking that question is when you hit that roadblock, right, for deadlocks and stuff, was this like there's a moment of crisis there from a startup perspective of like, building something new? Was this like, okay, we're not going to do this, let's change direction? Or was there like, we're going to solve this problem, heck with it, we're building something new and we'll go through it? And I think it was pretty clear that was going to be the direction, because in my mind, it could have gone two ways, right? You build a product around technology, right? Which you probably did not take, or you go and, you tear down the wall that's like stopping you, and you build technology so that you can make your product happen. And I think you chose the second route. I think my question was like, was there hesitation? Was there like thinking about like, well, which route we want to go?
Internally, there wasn't a ton of hesitation. I mean, it was a long process, right? Like we started investigating different blockchains. We talked to a bunch of them. We, had lots of conversations internally. Then we came up with the idea for Flow. But there was no hesitancy behind doing it so much as it's a big thing to do, right? Like imagine if you know, you're as an engineering manager and your product manager comes to you and says, hey, which database are we going to use? And you're like, well, actually, we need to write our own database. Like that's you know, like that's a big question. And fortunately, like the people working on that internally had enough, like myself and others had enough like experience and like social capital such that internally, when we said, actually, we need our own database, we need our own blockchain, people believed us. What was harder was convincing our investors that it made sense to do another round of investment to fund blockchain creation, because, you know, there's dozens of blockchains being pitched out there. Surely the cat people haven't figured out something that no one else has figured out. And it took us a while to actually convince them that we did have a unique insight on how to build something here that came from the very fact that we were building applications and had that mindset.
Right. So that's exactly directionally the question I was trying to ask. I have follow-ons, but you know, I probably can take them offline. Thank you so much for answering that.
For sure.
No, thank you, Kish. I appreciate it. Actually, so since Kish was the last one who asked the question, I'm gonna take a question, one more, and then we can get to an audience questions. This is related to the metaverse, because I think Kish is working on something. So how do you see like flow, like you know, like plugging into the metaverse, and like how that's gonna work? How do you envision that?
Yeah, I mean, metaverse is it's a big term that I don't think is well defined yet, and I don't think we all know what it means. The only thing I sort of know for sure is that if the metaverse is everything we sort of hope or dream, or anything on the scale of what we hope and dream, it would really be a shame if it was owned by one company. It would really be a shame if a small number of companies controlled mediated access to that space, and importantly, mediated access to things we think of as property. And so I am hopeful that Flow and other blockchains, but again, Flow is specifically designed to make it easy to interact with as an application developer, especially consumer-facing application developer, will provide that layer so that people building in the metaverse can have a community-owned and operated data store that manages those critical aspects of the system. Now, it's never going to do rendering. It's never going to do like tessellation and you know, inclusion computation, right? Like that's not what it's for. But SQL databases don't do any of that either, and that doesn't mean that they have no place, you know, in a game studio. So I think that that it's really important that both for consumers and for people who care about what, you know, the future of our world looks like, that as much as possible, we don't have sort of winner take all dynamics again, especially from an economic standpoint, because I think that's a really dangerous position to be in. I mean, one thing I think about a lot, and I don't know how many of you are old enough to remember this, but in the early Web 2 days, there was a lot of talk, there was a lot of promise between the idea of interoperable APIs. You know, Twitter in its early days, it even pitched itself as infrastructure and not a user-facing application. The idea was, you know, Twitter is like, oh, well, we can't just build the back end of Twitter, like we need to build the sort of initial user interface. But in the long run, everybody's going to build all these different Twitter clients and they'll all interoperate with each other through this simple data model that we provide. And of course, then Instagram came along and they basically sucked the follower graph out of Twitter and built an entire parallel business around that. And Twitter very quickly was like, and everybody else, right, in the Web 2 world said, oh, that's not gonna, like, I don't want to let that happen to me. And so that openness, all the APIs got shut down in the few years after that, except in a very controlled way, where it's like, well, you're allowed to use this API, but only if you're interacting with it through a specific user who has an account with my service, not as like, you know, a piece of infrastructure in something bigger. And I think that in the world of blockchain, we can kind of capture that that interoperability and keep it open, right? That we can keep people from closing it, because they don't, once they've deployed a thing on a blockchain, they can't take it back again. And what's more is that then that value becomes shared, right? Because, I think there's a world, if Twitter couldn't close out Instagram, but Instagram couldn't close out Twitter, then the Instagram and Twitter using the same social graph actually would have been beneficial for both sides, right? And so the problem wasn't that Instagram could use Twitter's social graph. The problem was that Instagram took Twitter's social graph and didn't give anything back. And in a blockchain world, that would be much more difficult. And so I think that's sort of what I hope. It's that more philosophical sense rather than a practical, this is how the metaverse is going to work on blockchain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, especially like if one company is not controlling the access to it, like you can have more like even wealth distribution through the system can like go to like more people and more entities versus like one entity. All right, so we're gonna get like one other audience question. So Tam Lee, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Sure. So I just wanted to ask, maybe just like, as you were retelling your story about 2017 and you just started in this space and you were like, let's try a bunch of different projects and see what hits. Just wondering, what is your advice for someone who's starting right now, like also interested in consumer space on crypto? What would be your advice there? Like how to approach that and find something that would be fitting?
Yeah, I think thank you for the question, Tam. I think my best advice to somebody who's building in any sort of nascent platform or technology space is to not over-index on copying everything, like what is expected from the previous generation, right? I think the easiest analogy is to think about mobile games, right? The computer games were a thing when mobile games came out, when the iPhone came out, when Android came out, and we started having these touch screens. And if you try to make a game for one of these new mobile platforms that had what any game developer on a console or a desktop PC would sort of consider table stakes, like it was just a non-starter. You couldn't do those things. And subsequently, a lot of big companies completely snoozed on mobile because they're like, well, we can't build a real game there. And of course, what ended up happening is that like folks like Zynga and King and others showed that Rovio, that you could make a bigger market on mobile by creating something simpler but more accessible. And so I think that, I guess I'm finding another way of saying, like, don't be afraid of an MVP, but like really don't be afraid of an MVP. The thing that attracts people to products is that it does something that something else doesn't do, rather than that it does all of the table stakes things. Now, in a crowded market, right, like Web 2 applications, if you don't have all the table stakes, yeah, you will get run over. But in a blue water market like crypto today and any other sort of new technology markets you might end up in, I think you can't be afraid to do something much simpler and have a little bit of jank around the edges, because you will succeed and fail on whether or not you have found a new thread to pull, not whether or not you've got all the trappings around it correct, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And can I ask just a quick follow-up question on that? What do you think about NFT? And obviously, CryptoKitty is kind of like starting that trend, and now it's like a big one right now. So just wanted to hear your thoughts around like NFT in general.
Yeah, I think NFTs. I have a lot of thoughts about NFTs. I don't want to spend too much time on it, so I'll try and condense it down a little bit. I think the concept of NFT, I think, can be much bigger than what it is today, right? It really is right now. It's like a digital collectible, and I think that's awesome. I think lots of people love that, and I think humans have always been interested in collecting things and fashion, right? Like showing off their personality through what they have. I think is a fundamental part of being human, and I think that since we live in a digital world now, having digital collectibles makes a lot of sense. But I also think that there's there's a lot more that can happen with NFTs. And you can imagine something really simple like a subscription to a software service is represented through an NFT, and things like that. Like most things in the world, the real world, are non-fungible, right? Your car is non-fungible. Your significant other is non-fungible. Like the individuality matters, and it's a quirk of how the technology was developed that fungible tokens were the first thing that happened on blockchain technology through Bitcoin, rather than non-fungible tokens, because non-fungible things actually more accurately represent the real world where us humans live, and fungibility is the exception. So I think that there's a lot more to come. The other thing I'll say is that I think that I just said that there's so much more than collectibles. I also think that there are a lot of people who really underappreciate the value of collectibles, and in the long run, the value of like NFTs will ultimately become a kind of digital fashion. And that may literally be like, changing the appearance of some sort of metaverse avatar. But it is like fundamentally fashion is about saying, you can know something about who I am by looking at what I have put on my appearance, right? Whether, I grow a beard, but not a mustache versus, somebody who grows a mustache and not a beard, whether or not, I wear a t-shirt that has a band on the front of it, or it's a tech company t-shirt, or if it's just a blank t-shirt, right? Like these are all choices we make about ourselves. And I think that if you only have to look in the world to realize that that's a huge part of what it means to be human. And I think that that is sort of underappreciated in some senses.
Oh, that's a lot of amazing thoughts. By the way, I love your LinkedIn picture. Is that your metaverse avatar?
That is a very good friend of mine made that green face for me years ago, and I don't know, somehow it captured me in a very minimalist, almost Picasso style way, and so I've used it ever since.
Definitely. All right, so before I jump to my next question, maybe like the audience, if there is anyone that has a question, maybe we can unmute yourself and ask.
I do. I have a question for Dieter.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Jinja. Thanks so much for this conversation. I really love it. My kids are in the background. I have 3 sons, so don't pay attention if you hear fighting. But I actually have two questions. One, I really love Dapper Labs, and I love Dapper Labs because I've been following some of the conversations on Twitter by some of your women leadership. And one of the things I'm really struggling with, and I asked this question the last time there was a conversation like this, but, and I mean, I don't know if you can answer this. Maybe you can, because I feel like Dapper's doing trying to do a really good job with women. But what ideas do you have? Suggestions? Like, what have you seen, or what are you seeing out there, or what do you think needs to happen to get more women involved in this space? And I don't want to turn this into how do we get more women to be engineers, or how do we get more women to code, right? Like, we already know we have these really major problems, and I'm noticing a few women on this call, but I'm really struggling with women that are absolutely terrified to enter any level of the space. And even in the NFT space, like, they're not even wanting to go there because they're afraid of all the processes involved to, you know what I'm saying, to like get cryptocurrency. So I don't want to hijack the conversation around flow. Flow is really awesome. I love it, but what can we do? Because this is getting really worrisome for me as a woman. And I do have 3 sons. Don't get me wrong. I don't have a daughter. I don't know if any of the men on the call have daughters or women that are, identifying as women, but I don't have a female in my life except me. So just want your thoughts on this, Dieter, because you're kind of powerful and big time. So I think it'd be helpful to hear your voice on this.
Well, I certainly don't feel powerful and big time, but I don't know. I think that there is a confluence of 2 things that have traditionally been male dominated when in the early days of crypto, and that is finance and technology. And those are two realms that have been, like I said, male dominated, even in a modern era. And so I don't think it's super surprising that when those two things run together, it tends to be even more concentrated than I think either of those realms on their own. So part of what I think we need to do, and by the way, I mean, I'm into technology. I'm not that much into finance. Like, I find economics in an abstract sense interesting, but I'm not especially motivated by making money, which is obviously one of the big drivers for certain people in this industry. So I think that like most accessibility issues, a big part of it is just having empathy and understanding that there's always room for more people, and we just need to learn how to speak their language. And so, I work with some amazing women in crypto, and some of them were drawn in by the technology side of it. Some of them were drawn in by the economic side of it. But ultimately, I think that we need to build products that appeal to folks who aren't drawn in by either of those things by themselves, right? That they're drawn in by what it can do and what it can mean. And so at some level, I think that's what we're trying to do at Dapper Labs, is to make this technology more approachable for people who don't come at it from either of those angles. And I think that will broaden it from a gender standpoint? I hope so, but I wanted to broaden it on other axes as well. And so I think that's a big part of it, is just making sure that we find ways to use this technology that appeal to people who are not driven by those two particular things.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, that's a really, really helpful answer. The reason that I actually did Top Shot is because I have 3 sons, and my one kid is a gamer. He's a gamer, and he loves games, and he loves basketball. And so we did it. We bought a couple of, I think, Kevin Durant's.
Nice.
And he taught me how to do it. And he taught me the reason why it was fun and interesting. And I thought, well, that's reverse. Like, I'm learning from this boy child, right? So yeah, I love the way you said that. I think, it's just worth thinking about all the time. And I'm always trying to think about it. So thanks for taking my question. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Fantastic. Ankit, you have a question, or maybe I can?
Yeah, but you're talking to me, right?
Yep.
I think one question I would have, I'll probably phrase it 2 ways, and I think both of them have kind of the same answer, but I'd let you choose whichever makes more sense. One is what do you think made Dapper Labs successful, assuming they're you'll consider them successful today? And I think the second approach is given kind of you've worked in sort of different projects, how have Dapper Labs thought about product strategy, and kind of what kind of things, maybe there's 100 kind of different things you think about, and maybe 5 of them actually get executed. So how do you think about execution and strategy at Dapper Labs?
It's funny. I was sitting here thinking about my answers to that question, and what I realized is that it's this weird combination between a conviction that you're right and a recognition that you're probably wrong. But it's a conviction about being right about the big question, and a recognition that you're almost certainly wrong about the little questions, right? So why were we successful? Well, I would argue it's because we were lucky enough, thoughtful enough to be right about something that we learned. I think, we didn't just come out of nowhere. We learned it from CryptoKitties. We had no idea that CryptoKitties was going to resonate. But when it did, we said, holy cow, this technology actually can appeal to people who aren't in crypto, right? 40% of CryptoKitties users never touched crypto before. And so what has made us be successful is that through good times and bad, we have never stepped away from that conviction that we are here because this technology is a fundamentally new kind of computer. We can build a fundamentally new kind of software, and that has value to regular people. And our job is to make sure that that technology is accessible to regular people without them having to be motivated by wanting to learn crazy technology or speculative finance. While at the same time, being willing to constantly question our micro decisions. You know, the 2019, the first half of 2019 was it was a whirlwind. It was chaos because we decided in January of that year to completely change how NBA Top Shot worked. Now, I don't actually have the counterfactual. Like I don't actually know that if we had launched that other product that it would have done worse. But the product we did launch did well, and it felt like the thing that we had before then wasn't going to work, and it felt like the new thing was going to work. And it took us like sort of like soaking in building that product that long in order to realize how wrong we were, or how wrong we think were about what this product should be. And so I guess that's kind of the answer is, you know, to have a core thesis, a big picture idea of what you're doing, and having conviction to stick with that until you know it's wrong. But at the same time, being really, really humble about the fact that you're just going to get all the details wrong and not being afraid to fiddle with them.
Fantastic. Well, any follow-on question, Ankit?
No, this is good. Thank you.
All right. So I have a question, and some folks actually asked this. What are some of like the best apps that you have seen built on Flow so far? Like we all know like CryptoKitties and NBA Top Shot. These are like really visible. So what kind of like and what applications you wish you have seen built on Flow, but you're waiting for that maybe some folks here in this group can do?
So I think, you know, so Genies is a project that's been selling avatars, avatar and fashion items that's out on Flow. We've got there's a group called The Fabricant, which is really like leaning directly into that notion of fashion and the idea of digital garments, like literal high fashion. Yeah, Genies was the one I mentioned first. And then we've got some like gaming stuff. So Matrix World and Chain Monsters are a couple of sort of like more traditional games that have a blockchain component to them. So that's where we're seeing like most of, and then Vive is another project that's art-based NFTs, mostly one-of-ones, I think. And so like that world is actually doing reasonably well on Flow, and has attracted a decent number of users. The stuff I get excited about, in part because like Flow was designed to make applications easier to build, which is another way of saying Flow was designed to make more complicated applications possible. But more complicated things take more time, and so unsurprisingly, it's these more straightforward products that are shipping first. But I'm really looking forward to some kind of social DAO coming out. So the team from Brud that we acquired and is working, we now call them Dapper Collectives, is a group within Dapper. They are working on DAO management software and building DAOs, and that's this idea of like an organization, not dissimilar to Zoogler's, right? Where it's just a group of people who have a shared interest and want to spend time together. But because it's mediated by the blockchain, you can that group can start to own assets in a really transparent and auditable way without having to sort of give the keys to the kingdom to a small number of people who sort of act as treasurers for the group. And I think that's a really interesting idea. And then DeFi is something that is coming to Flow. And I think of DeFi, there's two ways to think about DeFi. One is as a means to an end, and one is as an end unto itself. And in the same way that like when I go to the US, I'm from Canada. When I go to the US, I have to use a foreign exchange market to turn the money I have into the money you all want. But that doesn't mean I'm an FTX trader, right? Or an FX trader. There needs to exist a foreign exchange market, but I'm not engaged in trading. That's not the thing I'm doing, right? It's a means to an end. And I think that DeFi as a means to an end, which some people will engage with on a more full-time basis. I think that that's a really big enabler for things. So, for example, people being able to rent or borrow against their NFTs. If you have a really valuable NFT, there's no reason why it shouldn't be collateral to a loan, for example. And all of that can be mediated on chain in a way that doesn't require personally identifying information and a trust relationship. It can all be done on blockchain. And I think that's really some really interesting stuff.
Well, you already have somebody from this group who's building on Flow. I'm doing something in banking, actually, and insurance. So
interesting.
You will be hearing about that very soon. Yeah. So maybe we have time for one last question. So somebody was asking about the trade-offs that Flow made regarding scale and security.
Hi, it was me.
Oh, yeah, please.
So by the way, big fan of Flow, or Top Shot and CryptoKitties.
Excellent.
Career. One question I had in mind was, when it comes to blockchains, on the one hand you can have AWS, which essentially is, you can run anything centralized at scale. On the other hand, you have something like Bitcoin, extremely non-scalable but extremely secure, because even I can run a Bitcoin node on my laptop. When I look at Flow specs, I definitely cannot run it on my laptop. But there is a whole spectrum of what an ordinary layperson can do, versus and that to me is security or decentralization, and very centralized but highly scalable. And Flow seems to have met certain trade-off. What was your thought process which led you to do that specific trade-off, and why do you think that is optimal one for whatever success metric you are trying to achieve?
Yeah, I mean, I guess optimal implies a level of omniscience that I don't think anyone has. But unfortunately, we can't prove that it's optimal, right? We can prove that it's secure, and there are probabilistic proofs in our technical papers that talk that make a very strong mathematical argument that the system is secure under basic under the assumptions that we make in terms of the participants being largely not coordinating to destroy the network, but working to keep the network secure. But it's, I mean, I guess in a weird sense, I think more or less the question you're asking is how do you know you're right? And obviously we don't know that we're right, but what's interesting to me is and I certainly don't think that this is an example of copying. It's like a parallel evolution. What you see the Ethereum community moving towards is it's very similar architecture to Flow. Now it's multiple teams building different parts of it, which means the coordination problem is a little harder, and potentially end up with multiple tokens involved in transactions. But that notion of, I have a transaction, I send it to a sharded data store, right, which would be the data availability shards in Ethereum and what we call the collector nodes in Flow. And then there is some process that assigns an order to that, right, which we call our consensus nodes, and which would be the beacon chain on Ethereum. And then there is another process that takes that deterministically, or that ordered set of deterministic transactions, and computes the output of it, what we call execution nodes, and what Optimism would call a sequencer. I think Arbitrum maybe uses that same term. And then we have an additional layer of verifiers that make sure that those sequencers are correct. And obviously Optimism is going to ultimately we'll need to build something similar to that, and Arbitrum has some ideas about how to do that as well. I don't think they're built yet. And so those are very similar, right? And again, no one copying anyone. It's just that two groups of smart people thinking about the same problem came to very similar solutions in the end. And that to me is the best evidence we have that what we're doing is sensible. I don't think we can know it's optimal.
I would say my thrust of my question was not about, hey, prove me you are right, but more like, what were the goals you set for yourself in terms of product experience or developer experience or customer experience? And like, I'm sure those goals would have automatically led to the trade-offs you made. And as you said, rightly, a lot of other chains also arrived at the similar trade-offs. So it was more curiosity about what were the goals you were trying to achieve.
Yeah, the assumption I made is that as application developers, we shouldn't be asked to solve the synchronization problem. That, like, if you think of the blockchain as the operating system should provide certain primitives. Like, you can imagine an operating system that just gives you access to block storage devices and makes you figure out the file system, and then everybody has to write their own little file system thing, right? That would be a dumb operating system. And I kind of felt like that's what was happening with sharded blockchains. The good news is that almost, like, there's very little talk about sharded blockchains these days. And so that was like the big one. And then the other one, which I don't think has fully shaken out yet, is this idea that that decentralization matters. That having hundreds or thousands of participants, maybe even tens of thousands of participants, is meaningful in terms of securing the network. And especially if it means mediating access to the network. And so Flow is very carefully designed such that all of the parts of the network that decide what it goes into the network and decide, and then verifies that what is in the network is correct, those are highly decentralized and can support hundreds, thousands, hopefully tens of thousands of nodes participating in it. Now, all of that requires a lot of optimization of our code that we haven't done yet, which is why you can't run it on your laptop. But that is the goal, ultimately, is that you could run a verification node on your laptop, or more accurately, like a Raspberry Pi plugged into the wall, because it kind of needs to be there all the time. But that's exactly what we're aiming for.
Love that answer. Thank you, Dieter.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Dieter. And we're out of time, and we want to be mindful of everybody's time. So my last question to you, Dieter, what can the Zooglar community do to help you out?
I mean, learn what you can about Flow. I think that if you're not familiar with Flow, I would encourage you to go and learn about it. Because I think what you'll find is that it's a very approachable technology. It allows you to build a different kind of software in a different way, and that enables new kinds of products. And maybe one of those products is something that you want to build. Again, right? Like, I have built multiple, architected and built multiple distributed applications now, and this is the blockchain I wish somebody else had built for me. So hopefully you all agree, and I think that if you give it a look, that would be the most valuable thing you could do, because ultimately we don't. This project, the thing we're attempting, it lives or dies. Not. Can you still hear me? My audio just.
It cut off a little bit.
Sorry, can everyone still hear me?
Barely.
Okay, just a sec. How about that? Is that better?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, my AirPods just connected to my computer for some reason. Yeah, I mean, look at it. I don't want you to build on something that doesn't make sense for you, but I hope you'll at least assess whether or not what we built made sense for what you're trying to do.
Fantastic. Yeah, I shared the link. It's on flow.org. So yeah, so would love to see some applications built on Flow. Well, with that, Ankit, maybe we can close the session.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining this call. This was super exciting, and thank you, Dieter, for taking some time out and talking to Zooglers. Obviously, feel free to reach out if you have any other thoughts on maybe how we can, as Zooglar community, be helpful to you and Dapper Labs. And everyone else, if you're interested in other blockchain ideas, or if you want to just bounce off something, we have a bunch of channels through which you can communicate to us. You can drop an email to Amin or myself, and we'll be happy to navigate you in the right direction. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you, Dieter.
Thanks all.
Bye-bye.